Perspectives on the News is produced by the Interreligious Council of Lynn County, which is solely responsible for its content. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of KCRG TV9.
Good day and welcome to Ethical Perspectives on the News. My name is Leon Tabak. I'm a professor of computer science at Cornell College and the faculty director of the college's Berry Center for Economics, Business, and Public Policy. I will moderate today's discussion. Our topic today is what makes a responsible voter? And to help us explore this issue, we have three guests. On my left is Liz Sparks, a retired attorney with a background in journalism, who tells me that recently she's been working with the local Democratic Party to learn more about why people vote and how they make their decisions. And next to Liz is Brent Oleson, who serves on the Lynn County Board of Supervisors and lives here near Marion and has two children. Next to Brent is Kim Reem, a political consultant who's helped with some campaigns in the region. And that's where we begin. So let me start by asking you what brings you to this topic here. Maybe you want to say a few more words about your own background and your interest in what makes a responsible voter.
Well, Brent and I share one thing in common in that we're both involved in politics, I would say, in large part to Mary Lundby, who was a fabulous mentor to the two of us. And what brings me here today is just the relationships that I have in the community and the topic at hand about the responsibility of voting and our citizens, the role that they play in the process. For about 28 years, I've been helping with local legislative and ballot initiative campaigns in the county here.
So Brent, when you ran for public office, did this change your view or your understanding of what you expect of a voter? And
Well, a little bit. It gave me a different insight. I came from a very politically engaged family from Burlington. My dad was a factory worker and my mom stayed at home. She was a Democrat and he was one of the Reagan Republicans during the early 80s. And so we talked about, and it was expected that we would be participants on the civic stage in our local communities. Of course, I got elected, and running for office is totally different than being maybe engaged just in the civic process, not being elected. But once I was elected, right after the flood of 2008, my perspective changed. I think that we need people to be more engaged, not only in local government, but all the way up to currently the presidential election. Obviously, I think people see what happens when you're not engaged or when people are engaged that don't share your values.
Is there anything more you want to say about your background, Liz, that brings you here today?
Only that figuring out what a voter's responsibility is and how to motivate them and give them what they need to be motivated is certainly what I've been working on for the last couple of years with the Franklin Township Democrats. That's the question they wanted answered, and I've been helping them try to get some information and understand and analyze that information.
So I begin, frankly, I think this is a different year than other years, and I wonder if I'm doing enough I participated in the caucus, whatever it was, 2 months ago, and I wonder if that's enough to read ahead of time and select a candidate and go and vote, or if I should be doing more. In my household, I'm the one who runs to the phone when all those surveys come, so that's one of my ways of participating. Should I feel an obligation there? I'm not a big one for contributing financially to candidates, but I send in $50 or $100 once in a while. Should I feel an obligation to support in those kinds of ways? Anybody want to offer an opinion there? Maybe the one who holds public office has an opinion on what we should be doing to support candidates.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of people aren't engaged in local government or what happens in local government, and you can take that step from the state, then nationally. Chances are, if you're not engaged in your what's going on with local government, you're probably not too engaged going up the ladder. You're just maybe watching a news channel for a half an hour, and that's what you're depending on to make your vote for the most powerful position in the world or the most powerful position in your local community. And I think people do need to be more engaged. There was a saying, I don't know who said it, but if you're not at the table, then you're probably on the menu. And that goes, and I think that people need to be engaged enough that they have to take some time out of their busy schedule to come to know what the real issues are, not just what's being fed through the media. So it really is, doing your homework.
Well, I would just like to add that I think in Iowa we have just an incredible opportunity. It's not just reading about the candidates or trying to learn, but we have, when it comes to the presidential candidates, we get to meet them. And we somewhat have that expectation. We joke here in Iowa. People will say, "Who are you supporting?" And you'll say, "Well, I don't know. I haven't met them all yet." But there is that expectation that we could look them in the eye and that we could hear from them personally, on some level have a relationship or perceive that we have a relationship with them. And I think that's an important aspect too.
I was just going to say, so both Kim and Brent, you have tried to get voters to do things. Vote for Brent in his campaign, or Kim, get voters to vote for the candidates you're helping to work with. And so I'm going to just say, in this work that I've been doing with the local Democrats, and I'm assuming that what we are learning is probably representative of what we're finding, what other Iowans would say. But one of the things we were asking them is, how do you decide who to vote for? And so we were hearing 43% said, I want to see or hear a candidate in person at a local event close enough to me that I can go to it. 37% said, I listen to the news, and the news, what I'm hearing on the news informs me. 27% said, I want to discuss with my friends about the candidates. Then political advertising made up the minds of 10%, do my own research primarily on the internet when we asked, 10%. This adds up to more than 100 because most people were saying, about 65% were saying both, I want to hear a candidate in person and I want to discuss it with my friends. So that's what Iowans are currently doing to make up their minds. Is that enough?
I think that Iowans are more, maybe it's because I'm here and you have the whole year or 2 years to participate in the Iowa caucuses because the candidates come so early, that I think that we take that job seriously and are more engaged than most participants in a party primary or a party caucus in other states. That, this week, I think, or next week will be Wisconsin. Some other states haven't had this kind of limelight put on them, and you wonder how much do they do all the things that Liz talked about. Because I do everything that you listed, I think, are important things to decide whether or not you're going to support a candidate. Certainly, going beyond just what you see for a half an hour on one of the news networks, especially the cable news networks that are really tribalized now. So you get the news, only the news you want, so it reaffirms instead of, critically thinking about who you want to support.
So I had to take a course in civics for high school. I went to high school in a different state. And I recall from that course and our discussion, there was a strong sense that we have an obligation to vote. And I would like to ask you whether you agree with that. Are there any people who ought to be excused? Okay. So with the obligation to vote, presumably the obligation to be an informed voter. So I want to explore what it means to be an informed voter, and I want to ask you if you agree with this idea that we do have an obligation to vote. And as I say, a final question there is do you think that there are some people who ought to be excused from that obligation?
Well, I can
stab
take
at that?
a piece of that.
Sure.
My own view is that it's a privilege. Voting is a privilege. And, my parents always said, with privilege comes responsibility. And so it is my responsibility, I believe, to do the research and vote for the candidate that I believe, best represents my own personal views. Now, sometimes, like the Republican cycle this time around, we had 17 candidates to choose from, and it was pretty easy to say, well, this one's closer aligned to what I believe. Sometimes we have to settle, so to speak. Maybe the candidate's not 100% or 80% of our own, what our own personal views espouse, but 60% or 70% maybe, to me personally, beats a candidate who represents none of my views. And so I think it's my responsibility, in the decision-making process, to find the candidate who most closely aligns with the views that I hold. So for me, I don't think necessarily that it's a right. I think it's a privilege that I have responsibility for.
Yeah, and I would say that I think voting is a right, but like the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, doesn't have to be exercised. And I don't think it should be your obligation to vote. Sometimes I'm glad that you have a choice to not vote if you so choose. And I wish, and I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way, but I wish some low information voters, and what I mean by that is people who don't take the time to be fully educated on the choice they're going to make, I wish they would exercise some deference to not make that choice, or not. I want you to go vote, but do the homework and really be convicted about who you want to vote for, because then you have a say. It may not always go well for you. I've certainly supported candidates over the years that have not won. The other side has won, but you need to be educated about the people or the policies that you're voting for, and so. I don't believe you should be obligated to vote, but it's a privilege, but it's a privilege that is a right, I think, and it's denied to too many people in this country.
So Liz, you can follow up on those comments, or maybe you want to launch us in this direction of what makes our responsibility to be informed.
I would say just briefly, I would agree that we live in a representative democracy. The whole point to a representative democracy is that the citizens living in that country have to vote and elect the representatives that are going to go do the governing. So I wouldn't call it an obligation to be, is a little too strong, but the citizens definitely have a responsibility to vote. I don't think I would say certain ones shouldn't vote, even the uninformed ones shouldn't vote. I think that there's enough self-selection because we don't get really great voter turnouts, but as many people as we can energize, motivate to vote, I think should, because that's the way our system works. Now, I do believe that that voting has a responsibility of trying to do it as well as possible and as thoughtfully as possible. I am a little more tolerant, though, especially after surveying voters, local voters. I'm a little more tolerant, though, in what it takes a lot of time. People are very busy at various stages in their lives. They're more busy and less busy with things. And so I think that the more difficult we make it for voters to be informed, then the more I don't blame them for not having the time or the energy to inform themselves before they make a decision. So, and I do have the journalism part of me says we're starting to make it too difficult for people to get good information. And we're making it easy for people to just hear the things that they want to hear and get emotionally upset about it. And emotionally upset and thinking that problems are greater than they are, or that the only solutions are forcing your fellow citizens to do something. So I would like us to work on saying to voters, we're all citizens of this same country, and we do not disrespect and try to harm our fellow citizens. We've got to give them some respect and some leeway, and even if we are trying to get something done in our public policy with our elected officials, we have to recognize that we can't impose something on other groups, and we need to work with them, and compromise is maybe not a terrible word. Compromise is maybe the way you get along with your fellow citizens. But to the journalism issue, so how do we want them to become better informed? And so, they're telling us, Some of them, less than half. You'll notice that we had less than half on all of these. So many of them said, I want to see a candidate. Okay, the candidate has to pick a time to come. Are you going to make the effort to go see them when they come, or if it's inconvenient, or you're not going to go? I'm going to listen to news stories. Are you going to think critically of the news stories, and where are you getting your news information? A good source or a bad source. I'm going to discuss with my friends. Now, what I've come to decide hearing this is that, discussing with your friends is not really a bad thing. If you've got a friend that you think is more thoughtful about this and better informed than you are, but shares your political values and goals for the country, then if you don't have time to do the thinking for yourself, you're going to rely on this friend who you trust and who you have some reason to believe has done some thinking about it. I don't mind too much that you're going to talk to them and say, I think your decision is good, I'm going to go along with that as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's to discuss with the friends. The news stories, all right, I'm going to try and do this really quickly so I'm not monopolizing this. Because I have done journalism in the past, and I did it in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So I went off to law school in the mid 80s. And so the University of Iowa, since I've been retired, has had a couple of symposiums focusing on journalism, and I went to one in December this year. It was talking about media in the modern campaign age, and there were 2 points that were made. Professor Hershey said that you've got to understand what's going on with media in the last 10, 15 years. Things have really changed for the economics and the business of journalism. It is now no longer paid for by the advertising revenue, mm-hmm. because it is no longer the main draw, and there's so many bifurcated ways that people can get information that it's not the monolith that it used to be. People are drawn, and the research says, people are drawn to drama, conflict, pictures, video, immediacy. Campaigns are covered when they do these things. Sound bites are selected for these things, which might give you think back about what you've been seeing. It's exactly that. The traditional media still covers both sides by airing sound bites from both sides, not by analysis, not by research, not by investigative reporting. Social media and blogs have no such need to do that, so they don't have to cover both sides. And her final statement was, if most people can't engage with their news source without conflict and spectacle, arguably, do candidates and campaigns need to and should deliver this in order to catch the ears? That's a discussion. The second professor was talking about partisan media and then traditional media. And he was pointing out that, you hear about the echo chamber effect. In partisan media, all they're doing is reinforcing beliefs. There's no exposure to the other side because they're only talking a partisan side, and we have them on both sides. And there's also self-selection. The audiences that come to partisan media are choosing that because they're wanting to hear the reinforcement. They're wanting to hear those things. But the point that he made that was news to me is that don't get too worried about how many people are polarized. He said Fox News, for instance, has 1.8 million viewers, and it's fairly stable. The Rachel Maddow show on MSNBC, which is their biggest show that attracts the most people, 900,000 viewers. At the same time, ABC, CBS, NBC News, a more traditional broadcast news, collectively have 22 million viewers. So there are a lot more people listening to traditional media than to the so-called partisan media. Okay. But there is one bad thing, though. He said, now, even though that's true, here's where the polarizing is really a problem. He said, polarization of the people who are in the echo chamber or self-selecting, it makes those viewers really whips up their emotions and their dislike for the others. And it keeps polarized stories alive longer than they would normally be because the partisan media will talk about it. Now that emotion spills over, so that's a concern.
I would 100% agree, but I think the big thing that isn't shown in those numbers that you'll see is that talk radio is where some people get their news, the majority of their news. Right. And also The Daily Show, when it was, it's still on, but when it was with Jon Stewart, a whole generation of people, that's where they got their news or get their news. So there is the balkanization of the media, and then you can be in this echo chamber and hear and reinforce what you believe. But that's where I go again and say you really need to critically start thinking, especially if you're somebody like myself who's in the middle. And there are a lot of people who are in the middle. There are people that are diehard Republicans, people who are diehard Democrats, and we tend to divide up in our country on every issue possible, even certain movies, recently. So, but somebody in the middle, where do you get your news? I think you have to, I frequently will watch Bill O'Reilly, and we'll watch Rachel Maddow, and we'll listen to a long form story on Russia on NPR. So I get it from different, but I know, people don't have maybe that kind of time, but, I think it's incumbent on yourself to be informed and know when you're getting something, to have a critical eye. And that may be your journalist law background, my law background, and then being in both parties essentially during my lifetime, to see that, neither side has really all the answers, and you really need to move beyond just being on a team.
Can I ask Kim, because she runs campaigns,
Yep.
what can a campaign do? So this is looking at some aspects, but within a campaign, what does a campaign want? More neutral, thoughtful decisions made by voters, and if you want that, how can you facilitate that?
Well, in part, I think you try to take your message to the voters where they are. I think you made a great point about the changes in media. If I could go back to that for a second, it's overwhelming. I mean, if they're not picking up a snippet of something on Facebook, it could even be from The Onion, but they're just scrolling, and that's all the time and attention they're going to pay, to a particular topic. But they picked up something and they're going to repeat it. But you've got Twitter, instead of candidates talking in 30-second and 1-minute sound bites, we're talking in 140 characters now. And, so I think even the news media has had to make adjustments for the way we receive, or it's perceived that we want to receive information. We don't have the seasoned, weathered journalist. As you spoke about the journalism profession, where's the person who's been covering Iowa the past 50 years and knows, what happened and can put perspective on today from the things that happened so many years ago? Well, you don't see that anymore. What, at least I feel you see, is, you've got a media person who has a 5 o'clock deadline, and they want their 30-second clip, maybe a quote or two from you, and they put that on the news, and that's as deep as it goes. So I think there's been a lot of change, in how the political process, the issues, the candidates, and so forth are covered.
Let's bring it down to the local level too, though. The local media, the Gazette, Channel 9, others, seem to only, not all the time, but seem drawn to want to cover controversy in local government. So I just pulled the minutes from a board meeting 2 years ago where we expanded Morgan Creek Park. We ended up buying 75 acres because Highway 100 is coming in, and we had 22 different people come to the Board of Supervisors and thank us and say how great this was going to be for the community, and this park was wonderful, and looking at us that we'd be rewarded in 20 years for the insight that we did in buying this, so it wasn't developed commercially. But most of the time people will come and the local news media will want to write, well, they're paid too much, or but they never show up when we spend the $125 million. So there's too much emphasis on conflict rather than what are the positive things that people are. You can put out a nice policy paper, but they're not going to cover it. They're going to cover what you tweeted if you have 7 million followers.
Right. Do you share with me a sense that it's become more difficult to talk about political questions at work, that we become more sensitive? It's part of we're trampling on somebody's rights if we we do this. Am I alone in thinking that?
Well, I don't think so, but I'll just tell you, I mean, I'm a Republican, but I'm always first and foremost an encourager of people getting involved. You know, I encourage people to go vote. They don't have to vote my way. They need to vote in a way that represents their own views, something that they can stand behind when they've cast that ballot. Absolutely encourage people from all walks of life, you know, just engage, you know, participate. And, you know, I think if you approach issues in such an open manner, you'll find you can have discussions because people don't feel threatened, you know, by what you have to say or what you stand for. If you express a willingness to hear someone else's point of view, which I think, Leon, you referenced in some of these questions you had us think about before we came, but, you know, how do we broaden the way we see things? Well, we have to talk to people who don't think about them the same way we do. So, you know, politics and religion, touchy subjects, I think they have been. But
I would agree with you, Leon. I think it's a problem. People are far too sensitive now about certain subjects, and I think that's been, you know, part of, even comedians talk about how they can't go to college campuses anymore. Right. There is something to what's been said nationally about political correctness, and that's been going on since I was in college and probably before, but you have to be able to talk to your fellow citizens to be engaged, and we're not all going to agree, but there, you know, most people are adult about it and can civilly disagree, but there's just far too much now, only two teams, and you're either on this team or that team, and if you're not, then you're the devil, and there's just something wrong with that.
Well, we're coming towards the end of our half hour, so you might want to think if there are some final comments you want to make. Some of the other questions that I had thought about was, is it ever ethical for us to vote strategically, to pick a candidate that's not our favorite, but to vote against somebody, to keep somebody out? Is that something? Or, and then on this issue of being informed, I had thought as well, I don't want to bite the hand that feeds me, but I teach at a college, and I'm sometimes surprised at how much some of my colleagues are unaware of the most important arguments made on the other side. They're just, it's not that they disagree, that they somehow can be actively engaged in discussion and still unaware of what's being said on the other side. So as we come to a close, are there some topics we haven't covered, or a last word that each of you wants to make?
We've had a good discussion.
Okay. Well, I've got a little bit more.
we just leave, you know, people, our viewers, encouraged with the notion that there's something everyone can do. You know, you can give your time or your treasure. You can become a more engaged voter. You can be the kind of person who encourages other people to become more informed and to be involved and to participate. And we just encourage the participation of the voters in an educated way.
Yeah, and I think that you should vote for something. I don't like the idea of strategic voting, but if that gets you and you're informed and that's what you want to do, certainly exercise your right in that way. But don't fall for the demagoguery. Don't fall into the trap of I have no choices or the lesser of two evils. You have to have a government. You have to have a government that works. Get involved, get engaged, and be for something. Don't just be against.
We're going to give you the last word. Maybe you can say something about what's special in Iowa.
I agree with both. I agree with both of them.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today in this discussion of what makes a responsible voter. Thank you for joining us here on Ethical Perspectives on the News.